Do you hear me? Microphone's on? We're all okay? Good. Esto, me dijeron que esto, okay? We have to compete with the Indonesia panel besides, so you're gonna have to shout. I stand before you today as the CEO of IDB Invest with a profound acknowledgement to the pivotal moment we are finding ourselves today in. The urgency of collective actions to address climate change has never been more apparent. To adequately combat the challenges that lie ahead, we must channel our resources, intelligence, innovation towards climate adaptation and mitigation on an unprecedented scale. Investing in climate action is not just a matter of corporate responsibility, it is a commitment to justice and a testament to a smart business practice. However, the magnitude of our financial commitment is only part of the equation. Equally crucial is how and where we invest these funds. It is a truth we must confront head-on. We cannot triumph over climate change without harnessing the intelligence, innovation, and perspective of the entire global community. In the pursuit of sustainable future, we must pay attention to diversity, addressing imbalances based on gender, race, and ethnicity. It is a call to action to ensure that our investments are not only financially prudent, but ethically sound. Gender-based, balanced businesses and organizations consistently outperform their counterparties, demonstrating lower stock volatility, stronger climate governance, and heightened innovation. The correlation between gender balance and reduced CO2 emissions is clear across companies. Yet despite these undeniable benefits, women remain significantly underrepresented in critical sectors related to climate action, whether as entrepreneurs, workers, or leaders in government and corporation. Women's voices are not as prevalent as they should be. Globally, just 32% of renewable energy jobs are held by women. This disparity extends to the investment field, where the lack of diversity in climate finance decision-making roles is both glaring and concerning. To those among us who we seek to address climate and gender disparities simultaneously, I bring forth a message of hope and opportunity. There is a growing array of avenues for investors to align their values with their portfolios. On behalf of the IDB Group and IDB Invest, private sector companies' transitions to just economy is a fair and inclusive for all. As we gather at COP26, it's our 28, I started in 26, we're in 28. Let's not only commit to ambitious targets, but pledge to invest wisely and inclusively. Let us actions today reflect the values of justice, intelligence, and innovation that are essential for sustainable and equitable tomorrow. Let me introduce to you our guest speakers today, who will be addressing how innovative financial is crucial to identify opportunities and link gender equality and climate actions within the private sector. Tarif Kategasi, that is you, is appointed CEO of the GIF, the Climate Investment Fund, and a current CEO of RAM Harim Infrastructure Investment as a leading Pan-Africa private equity infrastructure fund. Sorry for butchering your name. Within 20 years of experience, and experience including roles in the African Finance Corporation, the IMF, the Boston Consulting Group, and PricewaterhouseCoopers. Welcome to the stage. Enya Sorem is the head of, Government Affairs and Support Mechanism of SCADEC, specialized in development renewable energy projects in emerging markets. Her career encompasses roles with the UN World Food Programme and the Food Security Cluster and the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. focusing on humanitarian affairs for the Nepal to West Africa. She has also contributed to research in migration and trade policies at the Princeton University and the European Policy Center. Enya experience includes emergency response, food security, gender issues, vital in her current role as CATEC. So welcome to the stage. This name I'm not going to butcher because I know her very well. Wendy Teleki is the head of WIFI Secretariat. She oversees the allocation and supervision of Wi-Fi financing, as well as initiatives in communication, advocacy, and learning to enhance opportunities in women entrepreneurs. She joined WIFI in May 2019, bringing a wealth of experience from her role, very prominent role at IFC, where she led numerous projects focusing on SME development in emerging markets. These projects include blended finance, investment, and advisory program, notably IFC's WIFI program and the Global SME Finance Initiative. Thanks for joining us. Kaurak Bhuta, yes, is a global managing director of Dalberg Advisors with a career that includes strategy, consulting, establishing a policy think tank in Australia for indigenous rights, focusing, founding social entrepreneurs, initially Dalberg Advisory presence in Asia. He advises many philanthropies and optimizing their grant-making impact and assisting private sector organizations in defining their social purposes and aligning with global sustainable development goals. Previously, he led Dalberg's climate change and measurement practices management in Asia regions operation. Thanks for joining us. Andrew Hurst serves as Executive Director of the Climate Finance and Global Affairs Canada. In this role, he oversees Canada's $3.3 billion commitment to aiding developing countries in their fight against climate change and addressing biodiversity loss. His career spanning over 20 decades has seen him in key positions, including Director for Economic Growth and IFI at Global Affairs Canada, where he managed Canada's institutional relationships with major development banks. He also led the implementation of a multi-donor program supporting think tanks globally at the International Development Research Center. Thank you for joining us. But before we start, let me invite Ambassador for Climate Change of Canada, Catherine Stewart, to give her opening remarks. Ambassador Stewart has dedicated over 25 years in the Canadian federal government, most recently as Assistant Development Minister of International Affairs at the Environment and Climate Change Canada, ECCC. Her tenure at ECCC since 2014 includes serving as senior role as a Canada Chief Negotiator for Climate Change, Director General for Multilateral Affairs and Climate Change, and Director General for the Americas. So thank you and welcome to the stage.
Thank you very much, James, and it is really a great pleasure for me to be here to help with the opening of what I hope will be a very productive and good dialogue on an issue that really is near and dear to our heart in Canada, gender and climate, and really promoting gender equality and moving the needle forward, especially in terms of international development assistance. James, you already mentioned the fact that women are very disproportionately impacted by climate change, and many of their livelihoods depend on natural resources, which are most impacted when it comes to droughts and flooding and wildfires, which we've also experienced in Canada this summer. And at the same time, we firmly believe that women can be very powerful agents of change in this fight against climate change. The IDB and IDB Invest have been key partners to Canada in our climate finance journey. but also in its gender equality journey. In 2017, Canada adopted its Feminist International Assistance Policy, which really guides our international assistance, including on climate finance, which we'll get into. In 2021, Canada doubled its climate finance commitment to $5.3 billion over 5 years to support developing countries in their mitigation and adaptation efforts. This commitment integrates gender equality in at least 80% of its projects. We're also very keen to explore new opportunities and working with the IDB group to build on earlier successes that we've had with them. IDB Invest, we consider to be a leader in advancing gender equality, and also in finding innovative ways to use Canadian funding to integrate gender and diversity measures within programming with the private sector. And this is no small task, and I hope we can hear more about that today. But IDB's group's efforts do take an intersectional approach, working with Indigenous and Afro-descendant people with disabilities, and the LGBTQ2+ community, and is really moving the needle forward with the companies that they work with. For example, in Brazil, with the use of Canadian funds, IDB Invest worked with the developer of the project to set specific targets and incentives to integrate Afro-Brazilian women in non-traditional roles in the renewable energy sector, which, as James mentioned, we need to have more women in that sector. And as a result, many of the women gained experience in the semi-skilled field, something that they would likely not have been able to achieve if it weren't for this project and the partnership that Canada has been able to advance with IDB Invest. This type of skill development, we think, is absolutely critical when you consider the fact that 1 in 4 Afro-descendants in Latin America live below the poverty line. So thank you very much for allowing me to speak today about Canada's continued partnership with IDB Group as it relates to gender equality, and I wish you all a very good discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, James. We're done with the opening remarks, fear not. So I will be moderating this panel from this stand. That's a little bit unusual. I apologize for that, but that's the space we have available. The session is live, so people are also watching over the internet. My name is Mathieu Pegon. I'm the Director of Blended Finance at IDB Invest. And today we'll be talking about the use of those performance-based incentives within projects. Without further ado, because we're short on time, I'm going to turn to you, Andrew. Presentations were made, so my job is easier. And can you please sort of set up the scene for us? Why the intersectionality between gender and climate, and even framing the question provocatively, why does it matter?
Thanks, Mathieu and James, and thanks very much for organizing this event. It's great to be here, and for those of you tuning in online as well. I mean, it should be fairly obvious, but it bears restating that climate change is not just an environmental issue. It's a socioeconomic issue at heart. It is at the core of development, and within that process and that set of issues, we know that women and girls are disproportionately affected by the climate crisis. And this comes through in a number of ways. We know that paid and unpaid care work that's done by women is often linked to agriculture and natural resource management, and use of natural resources like water, energy, and other kinds of fuel, which themselves are impacted by climate change. Gender inequality often means too often that women and girls are the ones that bear the brunt when natural disasters strike, which are becoming obviously more frequent and more intense with climate change, and whether things like when crops fail. There's lots of research to show that in the context of these things, unfortunately, even things like gender-based violence increases as a consequence. Even when it comes to health, we know that women are disproportionately represented in the health sector as care workers and healthcare workers, and are often therefore at the front lines of any kinds of health-related impacts that are associated with climate change. So we can think about addressing climate action as in large measure about trying to address and improve the lives of women and girls. So for us in Canada, obviously, it's not just linked to the question of climate and vulnerability, but it's also about ensuring that we engage women as agents and as contributors to the kinds of solutions that we all need to see in the climate space. So part of what we hope to do is shift the narrative, recognizing that vulnerability is important, but also, underscore the fact that women are as much contributors to the solutions and agents in addressing these things as they are victims of it. This is in large measure why climate finance policies and projects are built on the notion of a feminist and rights-based approach, because we really do feel that this is the most effective way to achieve a sustainable and inclusive climate justice. Wherever possible, this means advocating for the increased independence and involvement of women, girls, and other underrepresented groups in decision-making and governance, for instance, of natural resources. We've heard the stats. We know how little of the official development assistance actually goes towards women's organizations, and even less goes towards those who are addressing climate issues. So this means for us as well, ensuring that women's organizations and women's rights groups are themselves recipients of climate finance, so that they can be advocates within their own communities and own countries to make sure that the solutions that governments are coming up with address their needs and are truly just. So in that context, obviously in the work with all our partners, including with IDB Invest, we look for ways to make sure that these issues are addressed, and for incentives for recipients of our funding to be able to integrate these things into the work that they do, and the private sector is no exception. And hopefully we'll hear a bit more about how that's happening today. Finally, the last thing to note is that a core part of our support to these issues is around learning and knowledge sharing. We are and hear constantly about how there's a need to not do things in a business as usual approach. This means, of course, lots of experimentation, lots of innovation, lots of doing things for the first time. There's a benefit to capturing what works and what doesn't work in order to speed up and accelerate the kinds of things that we all need to do if we're going to have the climate action that we need in the time frame that we need it. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andrew. This is really odd, but we'll keep going. So let me turn now to Andya. So we've had a macro picture of the issue. Now let's talk about one specific example. Scatec co-developed a solar project in Brazil that included a performance-based incentive to promote the employment of female qualified workers in a project. Tell us a little bit about the incentive. How did it work? What are the lessons learned for you also as a developer? And where do you think this sort of helped you move the needle on the topic?
Thank you so much for that. Is it on? You hear me? Perfect. No, so our starting point with that project was really sort of seeing the significant gender gap in the renewable energy sector, which is specifically linked to a gendered competency gap. And I think we all know the value and importance of competency and job opportunities as a driver for development, right? And especially also to mitigate a certain protection risk, not least gender-based violence, etc. So on that backdrop, when we went into the communities to start engaging with the local communities, we had sort of two main observations. One of them was that these women were really vulnerable across several indicators. I mean, poverty, high prevalence of illiteracy, high prevalence of gender-based violence, low level of sort of labor market integration. So that's one. Secondly, they all expressed a strong need to start engaging in renewable energy projects. So we basically took those two pillars together, and knowing how connected they are, and we decided to develop this project that we called Women of Mendeben, like a training course in assembling solar panel modules supported by the Climate Investment Fund and IDB, which was targeting then 240 women from the Oslo region, giving them opportunities and sort of skills within a sector that is really promising on the global scale, but not least in Brazil, right, with your great solar potential. We did that in partnership with ITEC, this education, this technical university in Brazil. And what was really important for us was that this also sort of met the formal standards, so that this was recognized as a formal education. So it didn't just become like some sort of diploma you put on the wall. It was actually something that would be a real stepping stone towards new employment opportunities for these women. Second, sort of lessons learned that I think is also important, that was really at the top of our mind. Knowing how vulnerable these women were, we had a high focus on sort of inclusion. There's a good saying, which is diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being invited to dance. So for us in this project, diversity was sort of inviting these women to the training, and then inclusion was really to facilitate it in a way that it actually made it truly possible for the women to really partake. So everything from sort of all of the practicalities around transport and food and all of those things, to sort of making sure that the course and the methods we used really worked for women who are illiterate, to also making sure that this is a safe space, right? Knowing that a lot of these women also had a lot of trauma that they carried with them. And the result of all of those efforts was that we actually had 0 dropouts on that course. And that's not, it's not usual, right? Like, So I think that's really important sort of lessons learned. And if you can just say a few words just about the impact that we've been spotting so far. I think one thing is at the individual level. I mean, obviously the women who are trained, they now have skills. 80 of them are already employed in the Mendeben project, so that's great. But I think there's a lot of impact that we already see that goes beyond sort of the individuals that were trained. One is sort of the knowledge transfer in the local community that we already see. Secondly, I think what we've been able to do is to sort of develop a model that works and that can be replicated for other projects and with other sort of investors in the region. So we all are already engaging with other solar employers to see if they can adopt this model and train other women. So that's one. But then I think also beyond sort of the pure sort of labor market integration and competency building, I think we definitely also see the manifestation of that link between sort of empowerment and protection that I alluded to in the beginning. A lot of the women, they express that they have stronger female support networks, and that they also feel finally sort of emancipated from their home because they have something else that, that they can build on. So that's key. So for me, this is really a project close to my heart, because it really goes to show that nexus between gender equality, climate impact. We were just saying before the debate, you can't succeed with an energy transition if you're only playing with like 50% of the population. So this really goes to show that. And before ending, I just also want to again highlight the importance of having Climate Investment Fund IDB as part of this. I think especially for these kind of flagship projects, the value of getting in concessional finance to sort of catalyze those investments is really key, right? For us, I don't think we would have done this if we weren't able to get up sort of that financial support. But now, as we've done it once, we see the feasibility of doing it, and we're already looking at sort of replicating this in other projects in other countries. So that goes for everything, right? Concessional finance, get it in, de-risk it, and then replicate and scale it up. So yeah, that's where I'm ending. Thank you.
Thanks, Sandra. And I think it's really great you've stressed the power of the knowledge spillovers that goes sort of beyond the impact of the transaction, but sort of really transfer to you as a developer, but also other projects in the region. And we've seen that, we've had civil structure in Uruguay, where we discovered that those gender incentive was then subsequently replicated in some of the subsequent tenders where we're not even involved. So that's a great important point. And it's also a nice segue to you, Tarje. I picked up in a publication somewhere that you participated to a roundtable on gender smart infrastructure. And something that really caught my attention is that it was pointed out that the cost of incorporating gender lens into those investments is overestimated, not underestimated, overestimated. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on that, and does it sort of suggest that those incentives that we put in place, they also do have a behavioral sort of economics a mechanism where it changes the behaviors, but of something that is not that complicated to do to begin with?
Sure, thank you. And thank you so much for having me. I also want to acknowledge the government of Canada and the phenomenal contribution to mainstreaming gender and climate, because we've definitely seen the impact of that outreach in respect of whether it's creating toolkits, elevating the conversation, doing more work with 2X and the like, and really want to give a shout out to Canada for that great work. You know, your question about mainstreaming gender into infrastructure and the implied cost or not. You know, our experience, I mean, I'm currently running an infrastructure fund, and we're focused on climate infrastructure and the role of women and bringing really women to the forefront across all the verticals, whether it's renewable energy, climate smart, agriculture, etc., is going to be central because of the disproportionate effects. But I think one of the areas that we need to build upon is the integrated nature of gender mainstreaming. In that I think historically there had been an approach to somewhat creating a vertical or a silo with respect to addressing a gender or sort of women integration. But what we're finding, whether it's in renewable energy, off-grid, all the various sectors, is that one has to have an integrated, almost a co-benefit approach. So for example, in the off-grid space, the integration of gender would be from jobs and education to identifying women's livelihoods and what type of products, what type of agricultural lines that they're in, and how can you enhance their productivity, right? Then the other aspects are health, that integration of women, health, and climate. It's very fundamental, be it as jobs or be it as leaders of the household. So when you think about gender as being integrated into your investments and into your outcomes, there shouldn't be a cost. There really shouldn't be a cost. And I want to touch on the point about renewable energy jobs and competency gaps. With the massive increase in renewable energy and energy transition, we are not going to have enough engineering and people to meet the engineering requirements. We're not going to have enough people for the jobs in the energy transition. And this is a great opportunity for us to bring in women into that training, giving them the vocational skills and really bringing that sort of job-linked transition to truly be 50-50 when it comes to women participation. And I want to touch on another point, which has to do with renewable energy. There's often the refrain that it's difficult to integrate gender into a mainstream renewable energy project. And we need to push back on that because we have an example here. There's two great ways to do that. Back women-led sponsors, integrate women into senior leadership, integrate training when it comes to your engineers beyond just the low technology jobs, and we will mainstream gender into your mainstream renewable energy project. So I could go on, but I'll stop here.
Thanks, Tari, and thanks for the discipline on the time. And it's a good point, right? You know, when you build those incentives, it's not only about creating incentives for a company to reach X% of female technicians. It's also about incentivizing a company to put those training in place, because that's where you really sort of address some of the root cause of the issue. Gaurav, Europe. You're from Dalberg. We published this Friday together a study on our gender incentive portfolio, generously financed by WeFi. So thanks a lot, Wendy. Tell us a little bit about that study and sort of what are the main points, what are the main recommendations you felt sort of really came out of that study.
No, thanks. And maybe I'll just build a little bit on what everyone else has just said, which is, you know, and this is really what the study finds, when you incorporate these kind of incentives, there is in fact no reason to pay for them, right? And I would think about this whole idea of payment for performance at three levels. There's level one is I, as an investor, need you to do something that you don't really need to do, so I'm going to pay you to do it. Gender does not at all fall into that category. The second category is what I would call an awakening, which is you're not awake. I'm going to wake you up by explaining to you that let me pay you to go ahead and lend to someone you don't think is bankable. And then you realize that they're bankable, and then I never have to pay for you again. And then there's a third level of investment or performance-based incentive, which is transformation, right? And that is really taking a lot of root causes on what is driving some of these inequities and trying to drive that. Now, what I think, the way I would describe our report, which looked at about 7 case studies in Latin America, 3 or 4 of them in the energy space, and all of them actually incorporating many of the things the previous speakers spoke about, which is getting these companies to think about putting women into the workforce, training their senior executives to realize how to be gender sensitive, to provide daycare services, very across the board, without fail, that was high ROI for the companies. They surpassed the metrics that were set for them, and they're going to continue because, as you rightly said, there's a huge shortage of just talent. And I mean, it's a strange thing to awaken people to, but women were providing excellent talent, right? And it should have been known beforehand, and it just required a PBI to make that happen. So I think the very basic point, which is there in the report, but there's some nuance around how do you get there, is these things pay for themselves. So how do organizations awaken the people that they're investing in where they're seeing that not happening? I think the challenge I would place is how do you go beyond that to transform? And I'll give an example. The other hat I wear aside from Dalberg is I sit on the board of an organization called Educate Girls. And for the last 10 years, we've been talking about poverty and patriarchy as being the primary reasons why girls are not going to school. And that sits at the root of many of the challenges that we're describing on gender. Educate Girls has put 1.4 million girls back into school. It is the largest organization of its kind in the world. And as of last year, we've said it's not patriarchy, it's climate that is causing more girls to miss out on school. And these are the same girls that will then have children, be primarily responsible for the education of those children, for the skilling, so that they can get into the workforce of future jobs. And so I think that is the transformation, which is today we're working at the investment level to say, okay, how do we now integrate women who are already skilled or need to be given a chance into this space, but climate is already causing us to take 10 steps back with respect to the actual education that we've worked very hard for the last 30 years, especially in getting women's equal education. So I think there's a real opportunity here to go beyond what are excellent systems, and certainly the 7 case studies that we looked at are really remarkable in terms of how these things worked. But how do you become transformative? How do you not only awaken the companies that we're investing in, but what are the ways that investors can start to say, go one step further? Because we're at a very crucial stage in this climate issue where the underlying education of girls is at risk because they're on the front lines when it comes to climate impacts on education. So I just wanted to put that challenge out there as well.
Thanks, Gaurav. Duly noted. Wendy, we've done a lot of women-owned entrepreneurs transaction together. Those were focused on women-owned SMEs in general. You're launching a new window of WeFi that is going to look specifically at women-owned SMEs and climate. Tell us more about it, but also tell us what type of lessons learned from the previous programs you're thinking of incorporating into this new program.
Sure. So thank you very much. Thanks for having me here. So for those of you who don't know, WeFi, it's a global program. We sit at the World Bank, but we fund the multilateral development banks, 6 of them, including the IDB, to do work around the world to support women entrepreneurs. And we're currently have activities in about 67 countries. And we're generously funded by 14 countries, including Canada. So we appreciate those contributions. And we're working across the ecosystem. So we work with financial institutions, we work with regulators, we work with corporations to support all different kinds of projects for women entrepreneurs. But the number I want to leave with you is we have committed about $150 million to support WeFi funding of about 150 million in financing programs that are blended finance projects, in large part. And that has galvanized $3.6 billion in financing for women entrepreneurs around the world. So from 150 million to $3.6 billion. And the real reason we're able to do that is because of these blended finance performance incentives. So the way, these incentives are structured, it's essentially acts like a pricing step down for the financial intermediaries if they reach certain stretch targets. And in that way, we're only paying for the performance and for those institutions to do better than they would have done had they not had the financing or the performance incentive for these activities to support women entrepreneurs. And so this study that was done by Dalberg was really critical because it shows that these performance incentives are a very cost-effective way to influence not just the financial flows that are going to women entrepreneurs, but also the norms and behaviors inside of the financial institutions. And one of the things I like to think of as the benefits of these performance incentives is because they look like a pricing step down. It engages with the top levels of the financial institution. You're not just working with the person who's running the SME business. The CFO gets involved, the chief risk officer gets involved, the CEO gets involved, because they want to see the pricing impact of this on their credit lines. And once you do that, and once you get the leadership of the organization and you start having conversations with them, you can say, not only what's happening with your products and services and how much financing is going out the door to women, or whether you're able to get the right products and services out the door for women, but also to shine a mirror on their own internal policies and whether enough women are in leadership positions in the institutions. What is the staffing composition? What are their HR policies? And so when we go in with these performance incentives, they often also have this kind of role. We go in with technical assistance often, and it does allow us to really shift the mindset of these financial institutions so that they can do more in this area. And we see now more and more these performance-based incentives are combined, both gender and climate. So really trying to move the needle on both at the same time within those institutions. So, they're trying to stretch themselves on both areas, and the technical assistance allows them to look at both. And we will be announcing tomorrow, we are going to be moving in and doing more targeted work on climate and gender, because we do see this as an incredibly important nexus and a key area for growth for women entrepreneurs. Is $26 trillion in the green transformation. We want women to be able to take advantage of this. And we also want to make it through the just transition in a way that women entrepreneurs can survive. So we're looking at 2 key things as we look at women entrepreneurs and climate. The first is building the resilience of women entrepreneurs generally to green their businesses and be more resilient to the climate challenges that they're facing. And that's more going to be things like the debt side and doing performance-based incentives on the debt side. But we're also looking at investing in women entrepreneurs as leaders of the climate transition. So we want to be investing in, and we want funds that we work with to be investing in women entrepreneurs that are going to lead the climate transition. And I met when I was in in the We Exchange, the IDB event in Cartagena not long ago, an entrepreneur from Argentina who was benefiting from some of these programs. And she was in agriculture and she wasn't able to get the financing or the technical know-how in her local market. She needed to be brought into some of the global networks to get access to that training and finance. So we want to do more of that as we go forward in a more dedicated way on climate.
Thanks, Wendy. Sadly, we're running out of time, but I'm gonna take an extra 5 minutes to ask each one of you very quickly, what is it that we should have discussed in this panel and that unfortunately we didn't manage to touch upon? Andrew, you're up.
Well, I like this idea of the awakening incentives, and so I would be curious to dig into that a bit more, because whenever we negotiate our repayables with whether it's IDB Invest or the IFC or any of our counterparts that can take our repayables, the first thing they say is that, well, we can't hit a gender integration target. That's too high because our clients are not going to accept it. They won't work with us. So I want to know how this week, you guys can work with your clients to get that awakening, what the incentive needs to be, and is there sort of non-monetary things that can be done? Maybe it's not just incentives, maybe it's also disincentives for not doing it. So that I'd like to get into that a bit more at another occasion. Thanks.
Thanks, Andrew. And yeah? She was trying to find an answer for you, Andrew.
Oh yeah, sorry. Here. No, I think I'm a big nerd about sort of different models of concessional finance. So I would probably want to deep dive into that topic. I think it's interesting to look at sort of how you could, that's, Nexus and triple Nexus, how we can combine different sort of objectives and create new types of financing models that can both enable renewable energy investments with sort of a gendered lens. So I would have loved to deep dive more into that topic. Apart from that, I also just want to say, I think business itself, private companies like Scotec also has a responsibility, right, to respect what I call sort of our social license to operate. And I think there's a lot of responsibility to be followed up by companies, and a lot of learnings in that, and a lot of, as you're alluding to, a lot of rewards in actually having a gender lens to investments, which I think companies should appreciate. Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
Thanks, Anya.
I have a high level and the grassroots. From a high level standpoint, I think it's interesting to also look at corporate governance codes. Certain corporate governance codes are quite successful in integrating senior leadership, senior female leadership across the board. And you have success factors in different countries with different types of codes, especially for companies that are operating in public interest fields, electricity, health, and the like. And so I think that's something that we should talk about more, which is really more of that corporate governance compliance, if you're a board, etc. And then at the grassroots level is adaptation and gender and adaptation, and how we can build more resilience that's led by women, since they are really, when it comes to adaptation, really struggling the most. And there's some nuances with that as well.
Thanks, Daria. Gaurav?
Yeah, I might say a +1 to the codes idea, because I think there's a large amount of money that will start to flow with a gender lens. And we know that anytime that happens, anytime something becomes mainstream, there's a great inflation that happens. And I'd love us to talk a bit about what are those metrics that can be established that are quality metrics in this space, because as more and more money flows with the idea that you need to hit these gender outcomes, there'll be high ambition, but very low standards. And we have to protect against that. That's happened in impact investing, and we need to think about that from a gender perspective.
Thanks. Wendy?
Well, that was kind of a perfect lead into what I was going to say on both of your parts. The biggest challenge we have in introducing more performance incentives is baselining the data, because you can't provide an incentive unless you have the data on what the baseline is. And we've just launched a code called the We Finance Code, which intends to get the financial sector globally to track how much financing is going out to women entrepreneurs around the world. And we launched our first one in Dominican Republic with the Inter-American Development Bank IDB Invest. We're launching tomorrow a code in Indonesia. On the 12th, there will be a code launched in the Netherlands, and we have 24 other countries that are teed up to launch this code, which will create baselines across the financial sector in all of these countries. And that's incredibly important for all of our institutions to be able to invest. They need those baselines. And once we have the baselines on gender, we can integrate it with the very good work that's already happening on climate for financial institutions to track more data on climate. So this is really important. Anybody who wants to learn more about that, very happy to talk about it because this is something we're very focused on rolling out now.
Thanks, Wendy, and great point. You know, speaking from the perspective of someone that has to implement and structure those incentives, the lack of baseline is clearly a challenge and an issue. So we've published our study with Dalberg on Friday. We're going to advertise a little bit more post-COP to avoid all the news that are happening right now. We'll also be working on a quantitative study on the same portfolio, and you know, you mentioned the interest in nerdiness. That's going to be a proper academic study. We do have enough of a good sample that we do have a control sample, and some of the preliminary figures are very interesting. So stay tuned. Thank you very much for the time, all of you, and it's a wrap.